Welcome to the new order, a post-Anthropocene world. Capitalism, climate destruction, and economic growth no longer exist. Nature has taken over, projecting herself in the human form, which long time ago had become a dystopian creature. Through self-extinction, the human species transformed itself, a quiet canvas. Power is gone. Its time is over. Spatial and temporal dimensions belong to nature again. Was that bit of poetry just fiction or fact? According to the paper by Rockstrom et al. 2023 in Nature, this planetary boundaries framework update finds that 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries are being transgressed, suggesting that Earth is now well outside of the safe operating space for humanity. In other words, the planetary chaos is unbounded. The green region represents the safe operating space, while the red zone is a critical zone. Ocean acidification is close to being breached, while aerosol loading regionally exceeds the boundary. Stratospheric ozone levels have slightly recovered, but the transgression level has increased for all boundaries earlier identified as overstepped. For more than 3 billion years, interactions between the geosphere, energy flow and non-living materials in Earth and its atmosphere, and biosphere, which are all living organisms and ecosystems, have controlled the global environmental conditions. Of course, the Earth is a self-regulating system, and Earth's system state changed in response to forcings generated by external perturbations. For example, the solar energy input or the bolide strikes, or internal processes in the geosphere, for example, plate tectonics and volcanism, or the biosphere through the evolution of photosynthesis and the water cycle, influencing abiogenesis at the during the beginning of life, all the way now up to the rise of vascular plants and ecosystem interactions across different scales. These forcings were processed through interactions and feedbacks among processes and systems within the Earth system, shaping its often complex overall response. Today, human activities with planetary scale effects act as additional forcing on the Earth system. Thus, the anthroposphere has become an additional functional component of the Earth system capable of altering the Earth system state. The planetary boundaries framework formulates limits to the impact of the anthroposphere on the Earth system by identifying a scientifically based safe operating space for humanity that can safeguard both Earth's interglacial state and its resilience. And that's the problem, that the current inaction is because we are very good at setting personal boundaries when it comes to interpersonal interactions in human society. So I see no reason why we should avoid setting boundaries in our interaction with nature as we thrive of its abundance. We intend to clearly move away from the model where the German scientist sits down in his armchair in a room alone reading Latin. So the idea is that we look at interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity in our approach towards a new science as Birman models it. If I may be slightly skeptical, the model of integrating knowledge from different stakeholders and conglomerating it into a unanimous vision, which can be updated by common experience, seems to be a very idealized model, which I think is true However, it is the complexity of this new era or epoch that we're in that Berman and other Earth system science researchers are trying to get us to understand that this model provides a way forward. And just to let you know, I have only referenced interdisciplinary scientific research in line with this new science. And the Earth system governance demands a transition in human thinking from incrementalism to transformatism, just like in Rockstrom's paper, which demands the integration of the functional components to model the nonlinear anthropogenic perturbations which often go unnoticed in traditional approaches. On the other hand, it is also very important that we have a research program on this where Berman talks about looking at all of these kinds of models in the light of global inequality and global injustice. He has done research on decolonizing sustainability from the rich English-speaking countries. While he proposes English as a global language, I differ in that regard, because language learning is a way of opening up new possibilities and bridging this divide. Although I do agree that since most of the knowledge is centralized with the elite universities and they speak English, I still feel that there are avenues of research into that all of us can look at in terms of adding a new language and becoming world citizens in line with where the world is heading to. We clearly cannot continue with the nation state model from the 20th century. And at least I can say that I have progressed somewhat because I was able to listen to his lectures in Dutch. What are the key questions we must ask in the Earth system governance? Berman provides an answer, and these are pretty relevant questions. Let us see what the answer is. The answer is right in front of you, right? So Berman's project, of course, the Earth System Governance Project is the largest project of such a kind, which tries to resolve the problem of diversity in representation, allocation, accountability of this democratic institutional framework for Earth system governance. And clearly it is holistic. However, there still is a long way to go. Just a clarification on the previous slide. The proportion is higher with respect to the existing models, which I don't even think allocate any percentage of representation to underdeveloped countries. And even though, just to clarify, if you notice that Australia holds 75% of the pie, because we have to still accept the fact that by Pareto's principle, inequality can only be distributed, it cannot be eradicated. Given that we have modeled global governance, how should we ought to govern ourselves individually is the most interesting question. As humanity continues to shape the biosphere through urbanization, deforestation, and so on, and the ecosystem disruptions continue, what scientists have observed now is that these effects are not just increasing, but they're accelerating due to feedback loops which are constantly uh, perpetuating a vicious cycle. Since we clearly don't have time, what do? We clearly need to integrate a systems thinking approach within our lives to model the unanticipated consequences. And as Folk shows in his paper in Science, um, the the global drivers of these feedback loops across different scales. So they're fundamentally two concepts, right? Self-organization and feedback. The fact that the negative effects perpetuate across different scales is at a rate which is much faster than the planet can regulate, means that we have a lot of unwanted and unanticipated outcomes. If you notice here, Folk could not model the unanticipated outcomes. He could only model the unwanted outcomes because it is just too complex. And just to look at the entire web of interactions between as a whole makes it rather complex, and often leads to ambiguity. But such a diagram, I would think, helps us think clearly, right? Um, and and helps us identify critical areas that we can we can work upon, um, and also the interdependencies between the different nodes in the network are taken into account. So let us examine this network level thinking, which involves interactions and feedback, in the upcoming slides. Just a side note, it's impossible to be unbiased, but that is clearly not what I'm particularly referring to. While I agree it's important to be cognizant of cognitive biases, um, systems level thinking can account for them as well. It's far more fundamental. Systems thinking. If we are to have any hope of changing a system for the better, we must first understand what causes it to function the way it does. Systems theory can help us do this by providing tools for understanding complex systems and helping us move beyond end-of-pipe solutions to address the deeper structures and mental models at the root of the problem. As Mani and Kavanagh's four levels of thinking model shows, the outcomes or impacts of a system are ultimately caused by its underlying structures. Events represent only the tip of the iceberg, however, because they are most visible and immediate, attention is often directed here at the end of the pipe, and interventions are aimed only at addressing the symptoms of a problem rather than its root causes. One lev so how can one leverage systems thinking? A first step could be to identify the factors with long-term irreversible impacts whose outcomes are associated with a high degree of uncertainty. The second step is to sketch a systems map looking at the processes and system structures which lead to the impacts. The goal here is to identify the fulcrums or processes around which the system must shift to reduce impacts. We look specifically for processes which contribute to a large number of impacts across the system, lead to a disproportionately large part of a single impact. Um, so shifting it by that parameter by a slight amount leads to a drastic change. That's what it means. And contributing to reinforcing feedback loops which will continue to perpetuate unless the source of the problem is identified. Finally, we must identify the lever or the intervention which will ultimately shift the impact by the maximum amount. And that is the core and most challenging of the 3 steps. Not so fast though. There's a catch. Beware of unintended consequences. As I come to an end to the final presentation, I realize that despite the limitations of systems thinking, in terms of identifying the unintended consequences, even if we assume that we can account for all possible unintended consequences, the combinatorial nature of the problem causes a curse of dimensionality, which leads to the the problem being non-computable. The physical universe itself is non-computable. So even with our understanding of the planetary dynamics, doesn't translate into quantifying its complexity. But that does not mean that we must still continue to use this model thinking and create as many models as we can and identify the positive aspects of each of those models subject to their problematic assumptions, in order to be intelligent world citizens in the 21st century. I will end with an extract from Ursula Le Guin's novel, as I feel it appropriately communicates the woven nature and the inextricably knotted mixture of things that we call our planet. It is this epoch, by whatever name, which is both dusk and dawn, both changed and will change more, by us, by others. It is ever in flux. And how we, as individuals and collectives, weave our paths into it is our own judgment. Just to clarify, flux is also a scientific term referring to the rate of flow of any quantity through a boundary, and by regulating the flow of anthropogenic output, or using the net flux, we can potentially try to arrive at some balance. And if I may continue, what she's saying is that, but we, insofar as we have power over the world and over one another, we must learn to do what the leaf and the whale and the wind do of their own nature. We must learn to keep the balance. Having intelligence, we must not act in ignorance. having choice, we must not act without responsibility. And this, I think, is very, very important, because having these frameworks does not necessarily mean that we solve the problem, because we need to still identify how to optimize our choices within these frameworks to arrive at that intricate balance, so that we don't tip off the iceberg um, of planetary. Um, okay, I'll end here. Thank you.